Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 32 of the Argument Clinic podcast. I'm a Martin, and he's a what?
Lawrence.
He's a Lawrence. There he is. So, welcome to the Argument Clinic podcast, a podcast about fundamentals in Lincoln Douglas debate, whether you're a grizzled veteran of the tournament scene, someone striking out for their very first tournament just in a few days, a coach that is looking to improve everyone else, or just someone who likes to listen to the soothing sounds of Lawrence's voice and the gritty, grisly sounds of my voice. This is the podcast for you. So where have we been in the past? So Lawrence and myself were both at Apple Valley High School for the past weekend's tournament. I was at the Blue Key tournament the week before at the University of Florida. Truly opposite tournament experiences. The Blue Key, the mini Apple tournament, for example, was immaculately well run, and contained Lawrence Zhao. And the Blue Key tournament, despite being sort of an overall decent quality competitive experience, sort of was on SpeechWire.
Oh, why does that still exist?
That's a good question that I don't really have a particular answer to. I will say that they had this sort of great feature for online balloting for elimination rounds, where after all the judges submitted, SpeechWire wouldn't actually tell any of the judges how any of the other judges had voted, which meant that in order to actually announce the decision after you submitted all your ballots, you need to get out a piece of paper, break off 3 parts. Everyone would write their thing down on a little piece of paper, and they would all hand it to one person who would then read them off old school style and announce the decisions, which is true proof that we're living in the 21st century.
I would like it like America's Got Talent style, where each judge announces their decision one at a time, just to see the suspense build.
Well, so what happened in one of my rounds? I was judging novice quarterfinals, and so I was like putting the ballot. I was like typing up the decision online, and then one of the judges is like, yeah. So and one of the judges is like, why don't you just like before you submit it online, just like write it down on a piece of paper? And I was like, no. It's like, for objectivity reasons, I write it up first, I submit it, and then I write it down on a piece of paper. He's like, yeah, but do you like basically have an idea of who you're going to vote for? And I'm like, well, yes. He's like, well, then just do it right now. I was like, what? It was the Blue Key tournament is really just a logistical nightmare for tons of reasons. However, this year it was much better because it was run by George Clemens, podcast, person who came on the podcast, honored guest Susie Sharp was also running it, and Nathan Johnston was running it, my boy. And so overall, it was good. Now at the mini Apple tournament, I've had some great stories from that one that me and Lawrence exchanged prior to the podcast, but mostly it was. But I was at the novice building and Lawrence was at the varsity building, so I'm pretty sure I got the better end of that deal. But we like didn't see each other at all, which is kind of weird.
I didn't even realize you were actually at the tournament because I just not seen you on the varsity judging list prior to the tournament, so I just kind of assumed you weren't going, which I thought was kind of strange because I was like, Lake Highland is here, and then I, from the corner of my eye, saw you walking through the varsity building for about a whole 5 minutes.
Yeah, dude.
On Saturday,
we actually saw each other and exchanged, I believe, 1 fist bump and 2 words
and a hug.
Oh, that's right. I did force you to hug me. Haha, got him.
Sad. But yeah, I saw you for like a grand total of like 3 minutes. I was like, well, this is silly.
Okay, everyone. So Victory Briefs is great. And Lawrence, tell them about it.
Yeah. So thanks to Victory Briefs for sponsoring the podcast by providing the equipment and hosting support. Victory Briefs is a summer debate institute and high quality brief provider. You can learn more about Victory Briefs brief products and camp at victorybriefs.com. We just announced the dates and locations, and registration is now open for 2019. How exciting. I think, yeah, that's it.
Good. Okay, so this episode,
as you can tell, we are both quite tired from the Apple Valley tournament. We got back.
None of us are tired. We are just absolutely focused, straight-edged podcast hosts, and we are going to deliver you a military style, and coincidentally short talk on organizing your speeches. That's the topic. It's whatever it's called episode. Art of War, I think, is what we're what we're calling. Oh no, this is a choreography episode. That's right. We haven't had one of those in a while. When you're actually in a speech, what do? Those are choreography episodes, and we're doing one on how to organize your stuff. And when we get back from the break, we will talk to you about that for 30 to 40 minutes. Organization. So we've set this section, again, it's a shorter episode this week. We're going to separate it into 3 distinct components. We're going to talk about why you should do organization, when organization should happen, and how you should go about organizing yourself. So why organize yourself, Lawrence? Why be organized? Do you organize yourself in your personal life outside of debate?
I try, and then sometimes debate tournaments happen, and then my room turns into a mess. But generally speaking, I try to keep myself organized, using a planner, a calendar, taking notes, stuff like that. I try.
So what benefits do you think that sort of accords you, irrespective of the ones that we have written down on the page? The sort of non-debate benefits of organization?
Make sure that it makes me feel like more put together. It makes sure that I'm more efficient in going about my life. It's usually it ends up being aesthetically pleasing to like observe a well put together calendar or a neatly organized room.
That's true, though. It's true.
Yeah.
You just like you just like feel better about it, and your speeches are the same way. Your speeches should have a kind of defined order to them, not just kind of like a chaos. And one way that I kind of want you all to think about this is that if you are not organizing your speech, you aren't really in control of who wins the debate. Really, the debate is just happening to you. You're just there. You're just a person who like says some stuff and then maybe they win. But organization ensures that you are in control of how you spend your time, how you are utilizing your time, how it appears to the judges, etc. What are some other so let's talk about debate persuasion. What are some reasons why not debate persuasion, that's obviously good. Why whatever, I'll just talk about the first one. So organization is more persuasive to judges, which is not something that I think is like particularly obvious. But so, Lawrence, can you kind of explain just in a very brief way on how persuasion is affected by organization?
Good debaters who are organized are communicating to the judge their grasp and understanding of what is going on in this debate. And that level of knowledge and awareness is persuasive to judges who tend to like debaters who demonstrate more control and more knowledge in the round.
Yeah, that's definitely right. It definitely does give off a definite sense of control and knowing where you are. Remember that most of your lay judges are parents of current debaters. And these parents of current debaters have a couple of features. Number one, they don't know how debate works. But number two, they are vividly aware that they don't know how debate works. And as such, are trying to reverse engineer who won on the basis of things like perceptual dominance and persuasion. And organization can really, and especially the appearance of organization, can really help with that. But another thing is that if things are more organized, they are just easier to remember. They are certainly easier for you to write down, and for your opponent to write down, and for the judge to write down if they are the kind of judge that does that. But they also just will stick out ahead in your mind. If you just say 3 random things, they might remember them. But if you say, here are 3 arguments against this thing, I mean, you kind of give them nice little labels and stuff that we'll talk about later. Those things are far easier to remember, especially if you bring them up again. So that's why to do organization. Now let's talk about when you should do organization. Lawrence, hit me up with some details about when you should organize your speech.
So we can start with micro-level organization, since this is sort of the most obvious place to begin. And this is where we would be doing line-by-line debate. So line by line being where you respond to particular arguments on the flow. And so like there might be like a line for the tagline of a particular piece of evidence, or an analytic argument that sort of explains what the impact of that evidence is, et cetera, et cetera. And so the first place you can begin when you're organizing on a sort of micro level is this line by line. And the easiest thing you can do here is to sort of like organize your responses by, for example, numbering them, or making sure that you're being very clear about where on the flow you are and you're organizing exactly where you're responding to on the line by line.
So, and we call that signposting, right? That last thing.
Yeah, so you're signposting exactly where you're responding to. And good signposting is, after all, like very important to organization, because organization isn't good for you, it is good for the judge.
Also good for you, though.
Yes, but
Most importantly, it's good for them.
Like instrumentally good for you, but like it's probably not even instrumentally good for the judge. But it's the ultimate point, I think, of organization is like to help you like convince the judge.
But it also, again, I do want to stress this. It does have a very important side benefit of making your own arguments easier to remember. Like, especially if you are not like flowing that well and stuff, right? Then it's like, okay, well, this flow is like kind of a mess, and I'm not really sure where my arguments are and their arguments are. But I'm going to kind of bring this all up to the top. I'll be like, look, I have 3 reasons ultimately that I should win, and it can be a lot more difficult to get lost in the sauce if you're doing that stuff. So I really like numbering arguments. I really like it. I think that you should spend time in preparation time before your debates, thinking about how you're going to organize your speech, how to persuade them. We'll sort of talk about that later. But I think I would be like, when you're making a point, I would do not say a point and then say also. Instead, you should say, I have 2 responses to this particular point and reasons why it's false, or I have 2 reasons why this thing is less important than this, when you go 1 and when you go 2. And that just like is a nice, it appears, instead of just having like a bunch of random stuff you said, it appears to just be a block of things that you've said that is important. Okay, so I really like organization at the beginning and end of your speeches. There's a psychological thing called the serial position effect, which says that people are far more likely to remember things you say at the beginning of your speech and at the end of your speech, as well as the beginning of the debate and the end of the debate, which is part of the reason why being affirmative in late rounds is good. But so I really like starting your speech off with some element of organization. Lawrence, is there something in particular that you would say about that, like as far as organizing things at the very beginning of your speech?
Yeah, and so, usually you start before by giving a roadmap of some sort. Explaining which
that's
flow,
more signposting, right?
Yeah, and you say which flow you're going to go. So it's like, before I begin my speech, I'm going to start with the negative case and move on to the affirmative case, or start with the affirmative case, move on to the negative case. And so yeah, it's usually the first and most obvious form of organization is to make sure you're signposting prior to the speech and giving a roadmap of where you're going to go.
Yeah, but not just the roadmap. Is there something like during the actual speech that you would maybe please recommend that people do as far as organization?
Are you talking about sort of giving an overview to the speech?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like overviews are usually pretty useful because they sort of help explain the direction of the speech that you're about to give, because a lot of judges, especially those who are not intimately familiar with debate because they do other things with their life, like real world things, it's going to be a little bit hard for them to track what is going on. So if you tell them sort of the direction of the speech that you're going to take and give an overview and explain sort of what you are going to do to win this round, it is helpful because it then helps provide a sort of guide to the judge to help them understand the arguments you're about to make and where you're going to go. And it's also useful on a sort of just perceptual level because it now gives off the idea that you have a vision for this speech and you're organized and ready to go and you know what you're going on. Whereas debaters, you just sort of start jumping right into the thick of it. They just give their roadmap and they just start immediately blazing through into the depths of the flow. It seems almost to most judges like you're just kind of making it up as you go and you're not really sure exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so that's why I think giving overviews at the top of speeches is very helpful to explain to the judge, what is going to happen, and that communicates that you're organized and ready to go.
Do you have to use the word overview when you do it?
No, but it's probably the most
right.
Yeah, it's a clear word. It's easy to use.
Yeah, like the word impact, it just turns out that word for lay judges is just like meaningful enough on its own that you can just freely use it. But yes, ultimately you start the debate and you're like, look, I'm starting my speech. These are the issues that are really the important ones, that you should center your decision based on this kind of thing. And that's why I'm going to talk about this first, and then I'm going to talk about this other thing that's less important. And that kind of just not only allows you to seem like you have your stuff together, you just end up debating it well. Okay, so ultimately, the whole point of organization, as far as like when you would do it, is to figure out how you're supposed to put the pieces together for the judge. So I treat weighing arguments as a form of organization. And by that I mean, if you are in a debate, okay, you want not just to organize the debate for you, as Lauren said, you're organizing the debate for the judge. So what you do is you say, look, judge, there are a lot of swirling issues in this debate, and this is the issue that is vital. You should pick this issue. You should prioritize exactly this kind of issue. And you say, look, judge, there are three sort of main issues in this debate. My argument is that this one's the most important, this one's the second most important, and this one's the third most important. And just cards sort of taking, because think about this from the perspective. So how about this, Lawrence? From the perspective of a lay judge, how organized is the debate without debaters, being organized? I understand that that's a vague question.
I would wager most are not very organized.
Basically, I think that for a lot of people, right, that are not flowing, especially, or not really flowing in any sort of meaningful way, the debate round will seem just kind of like a mess. Just a lot of different stuff everywhere. It's like, how do you know who to vote for? It's almost impossible. Yeah, they said this thing, and they said this thing, and who knows who's right? And I don't really remember most of it, right? So the point is, you're like, look, I know that you kind of acknowledging that. You're like, look, the debate is complex, and here's what you should do with that, right? Here's what I want you to do with this complexity. Yes, there are a lot of issues in this debate, but this one is really vital, and you should consider it. And that basically is a weighing argument. It's like, yes, look, I understand. There's a lot of arguments about democracy. Maybe it's confusing, maybe it's not, right? But there are certainly a lot of factors. And I think that I've argued that this factor is really a lot more important than the other factors. And that is a form of organization that I think really helps people. And this goes back to something that I've said on other episodes. And this is a very vital point. So a lot of judges do not know what's important. It is your job to tell them. And it is not your job to mince words. I want you to tell your judges, this is important. This is extremely important. This is vital. This is crucial. I want you to use those words. I want you to say, Judge, this is an extremely important issue in this debate. And it is vital that you think about it absolutely first. And it's this. And I promise you, not only when you do that will they remember it more, that will kind of define the whole debate for your judge. You've organized it for them. You've said, look, there is a lot of stuff, and this is the one thing you actually should care about, etc. So another thing I've written here for organization, and this is the last sort of when you do it with organization, is what do you do with the argument? Lawrence, can you sort of talk about this? Why is it important to tell your judge what to do with arguments? Shouldn't they just know?
Wow, how presumptuous of you.
I do like presumption.
That is terrible. So
got him.
So let's say there are two types of judges, ones that knows what's going on and ones that don't. So I would say for both types of judges, it's still very important to tell them what to do. For the judge that does know what's going on, they would like to know that you know what is going on by explaining what to do with an argument. So if you win X argument, what does this do? Does this undermine, an assumption in the affirmative case? Does this, for example, outweigh a negative argument? Does this prove that it's more important than something else? Is it a prior issue to consideration of another affirmative argument? What happens? And if all you do is just say it and then expect the judge to figure it out, and you don't communicate to the judge what to do with that argument, the judge that does know what's going on is just getting the message, wow, you don't know what's going on. You as the debater are very unclear about what is happening in this debate. And so that is actually very harmful for you in that instance, because now you don't know what's going on. Now the judge thinks that you don't know what's going on. And for a judge that does not know what is going on, well, now it is equally as important, maybe a little bit more, to tell them what to do, because for most judges, they're just going to respond to you winning an argument with something along the lines of, so what now? And you need to be able to answer that question for them. I am winning X argument. This matters because, and then you have to communicate to the judge what to do with that argument. And so for the judge that doesn't know what's going on, they need to know if this in fact takes out the entire negative case, or if all it does is really just take out one affirmative contention, or if it turns an entire negative case, or something like that. And so if they don't know what's going on, then all they're left with is an argument, and then they just are like, all right, now what? And you need to tell them what to do.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, right, for a lot of these judges, and this is, by the way, equally true of tech judges, right? And maybe even more so, right? But you really need to tell them what's going on, right? It's technically not enough to make the argument, but also even in lay rounds, it's not enough. You know, who knows what you're supposed to do with an argument? You know, Lawrence, how many times have you judged a debate where someone was just like, utilitarianism, it's really hard to predict consequences because, like, one thing causes an infinite chain of other actions.
Yeah, and so, like,
I mean, just like, what the heck are you supposed to do? Like, you can imagine that being in all sorts of situations, right?
Right, and this argument is made quite frequently, and there's so many different implications or things that you could do with this argument. You could, for example, impact it as part of the problem of moral cluelessness, and like, if it's impacted it out as that objection, well, that undermines the entire viability of utilitarianism as an ethical theory from the start. But if all you say is it's hard to predict consequences because they stretch out into the near future, into the infinite future, well, then you've just pointed out that ethics is hard, and it's really tough to figure out what the best thing to do is under utilitarianism. And so those are two wildly different conclusions. One just being like ethics is difficult, and the other one is being like your standard is just unusable and we should scrap it. And so, for example, that argument like has other implications outside of that as well. And if I don't know what to do with it, then, well, I don't know what I just don't know what to do with it. I'm not sure how else I can explain that.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Judges don't just listen to what you say and then vote for you. They do things with your points, right? What do I do with this? How do I treat it? Vital. Okay, so let's talk about how to organize particular speeches, and this will actually be the last section of our podcast today. So, how to organize the 1N. I think this one's pretty easy, Lawrence. How do you do it?
You say, I will first present the negative case and then move on to refute the affirmatives. You then read your nicely prepared negative case.
What if your negative case isn't nicely prepared?
Then you should lose, and
bold,
or at least feel bad about yourself for a while. Yeah, and then you will read your nice, preferably, appropriately timed negative case at about 3 to 3 minutes 30 seconds long, and then at the end you will clearly broadcast to the judge, I will now move on to refute the affirmative case. And as you refute the affirmative case, you will do the sort of micro level organizational issues that we were discussing earlier, such as saying explicitly, starting with my opponent's value of morality. I'm not going to attack this because attacking the value in Lincoln Douglas debate is a waste of time. So now on their criterion of insert, and then present your numbered responses and explain, on their criterion of utilitarianism. First, it is incorrect because we cannot aggregate pleasure. 10 headaches does not equal 1 migraine or something like that, and then move on.
But what do you do before you move on with that argument?
You tell them what to do with that argument.
Yeah. Otherwise, you just link to all of our arguments.
Although I will say it's probably less of an issue in the first negative constructive than it is in the second negative and second affirmative speeches.
I mean, that is it is less, but still, I think vital, because if you say what you're going to do with it, then that's a thing they can concede now.
Yes, agreed.
They're like, not only did they drop this, they dropped that you should do this with it, and so now you are blackmailed into doing it for me.
Yeah, and I will say when I judge local style debates and people are presenting the first negative construct or the negative constructive, it's really not a second one. Presenting the negative constructive, the thing that I see that is the most annoying, I think, is when they don't respond to specific things the affirmative says in a well organized and clear manner that uses numbering. And I think in these debates, especially in the first negative speech, there's no excuse for not numbering your arguments and to very clearly tell me where these arguments go. You should have prepared the speech beforehand. Like there are only a certain amount of affirmative responses to that, or affirmative arguments to prepare against. And it's very annoying to me when people respond to the affirmative case and they don't number, or they're very unclear about what they're responding to, and they sort of just generally respond to the affirmative case as a whole without going to particular affirmative arguments and saying on their first subpoint of X, my first response is Y. And all they do is instead just like, now in the affirmatives like contention, and then they just like read all their answers, and it's unorganized, it's unnumbered. It's not clear what any of those arguments do for them, where they go, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, this is extremely right. So there's one tactic that I want to think that is also pretty important for the 1N. That's called grouping arguments, and this is an organizational tool at your disposal. Lawrence, what does it mean to group an argument?
I'm not sure how to explain it without using the term group, but to say that there's like a set of affirmative arguments that are very similar, and that you will respond to all of them collectively. So like,
okay.
Say,
sorry to interrupt. It's not just affirmative arguments, right?
Well, okay, sorry. Any group of your opponent's arguments or responses, and that are relatively similar, so you can just respond to them as a collection.
Yes. How similar do they have to be, though?
I'd say pretty similar, at least if not in their content, then at least their function. So, for example,
yes. So the point is like it's just like if they have a common, thread that you want to attack.
Yeah. So like there might be a variety of reasons for why utilitarianism is sort of a bad decision procedure, because maybe it causes it's very difficult to calculate, it's very difficult to aggregate, and it's very difficult to predict consequences. And while the content of these arguments are actually relatively distinct, they all have very similar function, which is to indict utilitarianism as a decision procedure. And so you could group all of those together and say, these only prove that it's hard, not impossible. Empirically speaking, we can make predictions and calculations about the future, stuff like that. And so you don't have to respond to each one individually. You just group the common thread of arguments together and respond to it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a pretty important thing for the 1N, because especially in lay rounds, you just do not have enough time to answer all their cards. Right? I mean, by all their cards, I mean like all freaking 4 of them they read, right? But like,
well, that is to say if they have real cards, because some people do not have real highlighted pieces of evidence, and they just kind of like insert one sentence quotes from people, and then their affirmative case has 25 cards in it because it is 25 individual sentence quotes from authors.
Oh, so have you been judging public forum debate too?
Thankfully, no. But I have witnessed this in local Lincoln Douglas debate rounds.
Really? That person probably did PF, because that actually is what happens in PF. I don't know if you've seen it, but like people just paraphrase stuff, and like
I have seen it. It's so awful. I think it might be close to just being academically dishonest. Actually, I remember at NSDA Nationals this year, I was helping the middle school LD division, and once those debaters were eliminated, I was helping the public forum debaters. And so they were like, please cut some evidence about visas. And so I like cut a, typical style LD card, and they're like, we need this to be shortened to about 10% its original length. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, it has to be paraphrased basically, because otherwise we get outcarded, because the other public forum debaters will read 17 one sentence quotes against us.
It's 17 studies. Yeah, it's so funny you discovering that now, because like it's been that way for years. It's so bad. But if you think about it, this is the way that I can kind of. I'm sorry that this really is a tangent, guys. But like that does kind of mirror the way that real life discussions among lay people of studies actually happen. Right? They're just like, oh, I heard the following 30 studies. And they're like, so like, it is kind of similar to the way that a public forum would go down, right? Try and imagine like a town hall discussion. You wouldn't read a card. You would be like, well, there's the study that says this. How do you respond, Mr. Mayor? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable for like not debate people.
Yeah, I mean, like in the context of debate, I think it certainly hurts the activity. But the point is, I understand why it's a thing. For lay rounds, for tech rounds, it's a shame that they don't really like have theory. But like if there was a theory argument, you definitely should say that. Okay, so let's start about the 1AR. Lawrence, you've isolated a particular note for how people should organize the 1AR. What was that?
Okay, so this is in fact my biggest pet peeve of more traditional style debaters giving the first affirmative rebuttal, which is they almost always start by refuting the negative case and then going back to defend their affirmative case. And this irks me to no end, partially because it's self-hatred, because this is what I did for the vast majority of my high school career.
Self-hatred!
Yes, but also because I think it reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how organization works and how debate strategy works. No affirmative case should ever be written in such a way that it does not anticipate the most obvious negative arguments on the topic. So, for example, on this resolution, which is about the public's right to know and the candidate's right to privacy, if your affirmative case does not have an argument for why we should be less than concerned with the right of privacy of candidates, I don't know how it affirms at all. And so it seems strange to me that when the negative reads their, negative case about the candidate's right to privacy being good for some important principle or reason or something like that, and the affirmative does not have an answer built in to their affirmative case to take that out, I'm just like, wow, you've constructed a poor affirmative case. And so I think part of the reason for why it's important to start with the affirmative case is at least because it should be the bedrock and the basis by which the best criticisms of the negative case arise. Like, for example, your affirmative case on this topic should probably have some built-in reasons for why privacy is not like an absolute or even close to important right, especially in the face of other valid concerns, and have like a contention or at least a few arguments discussing that. And so why not just start with your affirmative case where you've already read some pretty nice, evidence and made some pretty smart arguments that indict the negative case. And the second reason I think that you should start with the affirmative case and then move to the negative case is you want to start with, the ability to not lose debates. And that seems kind of important. And so many people will overcover the negative case. They'll spend like 2 minutes and 30 seconds on a 3-minute negative case. And then they'll get to their affirmative case and all of a sudden they've run out of time. They have 1:30 left and they now have to win the value criterion debate and then win each of their contentions against a slew of negative responses. And then they will extend their affirmative contention in this manner. They'll say, on my affirmative contention, extend it, and then they drop all of their responses the negative is made, and then they move on. And now, at the end of this debate, the best they can hope for in the 2AR is winning that the negative case is false, and that their affirmative case is also, like, at best, not entirely wrong. Because they have, like, very little reason to affirm in a world in which they've extended their affirmative case for such a short period of time. So it is a huge gripe when debaters start the roadmap in the 1AR with NC-AC, when instead they should be saying AC-NC. They should be A, trying to not lose the debate by winning their affirmative case, and B, using their affirmative case to answer the negative case.
Yeah, I 100% agree, especially with that last thing. If you were so like Lawrence, how many times during your 1AR did you run out of time?
Oh, actually pretty rarely by like the middle of like the second semester freshman year. But prior to that.
So you really were not doing tech rounds then?
No. It was Oklahoma. But
yeah. It's like in tech rounds, and I'm sure that the listeners can vibe with me on this. You just run out of time every single debate.
Yeah, you better. I mean, like, otherwise I'd be like, what did you just like run out of things to say in your 1AR? That seems unlikely.
Yeah. So the thing is, right, like, if you're just going to run out of time on their case, don't forget to extend offense. Like, how are you supposed to win? And also, okay, you should frame the debate not around the things your opponent has done wrong. The debate should be about your stuff, right? You want to never start that. So guys, this is a thing. Never, ever start a speech with the phrase, my opponent said. No. Tell them what you're saying. I don't care what your opponent has said. And the vibe you should be giving off is that the judge shouldn't care about what they said. Your point needs to be, okay, So here is my point. And I just want you to focus on this, and I want this point to be vital. I want this to stand out in your mind. And then later you're like, and this inferior negative case, I guess I'll talk about it for a bit. You know? Just like talk about your stuff first. Be right. Start with the truth. And you should also, even if you're starting on your case, do not start with, my opponent is wrong about the reason that I am wrong about my point. Or, in the worst case possible, a 2AR. My opponent is wrong that the reason that I gave for their argument being wrong is wrong. No. Just be like, here's my point. I am right. Here's why. But always start with your points first. Organize that first. And always start with the 1AR. Or sorry, always start with your AF and the 1AR. I recommend, no, Lawrence, maybe you can give a different amount, but where I currently am is I think like 230 on the AC and then like a 130 on their case.
Oh, I was actually literally about to recommend that exact same split.
Yeah, great minds think alike. Me and Lawrence have not talked about that split, right? I think it maybe is defensible to go like 215, 145. And also, again, maybe defensible to go 245, 115. But I think the sweet spot is 230, 130.
Yeah, and of course you like make adjustments in round, but like, yeah, good general rule to follow, I think.
Yeah, and that's because, again, you want it to be majority about your case. But you also, here's another important thing, though. Don't talk about the AF case for 4 minutes. You'll just lose. You need to talk about the neg case. You need to look like you're debating your opponent. Even if your case is just more important than their case. Sure, say that. But then also show your opponent some respect. Go over to their case, beat their stuff. Okay, so I have a particular theory on how I want to give the 2N, but I want Lawrence in lay rounds. How do you suggest that you give the 2N? I'm legitimately interested in hearing your opinion.
Okay, so it's actually been a while since I've really thought about second negative speech strategy.
Do you want me to give my theory and then you can a hypothesis and then you can kind of just comment on it?
Let's do that so I can collect my thoughts.
Okay, so here's my view. So here's the thing. Especially for newer debaters, the 2N is a problem speech. And in particular, it's a problem because it's so long. And it basically is entirely filled with, organization and arguments. So I see debaters do a lot of the following. They just like extend every just random point that they've made throughout the debate and then sit down. Or they just don't know what to do at the time. A lot of novices end their speeches early. I saw that a bunch of times. Do not ever end your speech early. That's giving your opponent free speech time. Never, ever do it. There's always more stuff to say, I promise. Just train yourself to think that way. When in doubt, way more. But look, it's easy to get lost in this speech. And even if you're competent, it is easy for the judges to get lost in your speech. It's a long time, and it's just you talking. The 2AR is, at least I think for newer debaters, a little more compact. Here's my recommendation for the 2N. Number one, this is always true. Start with your case. That is not negotiable. You always start with your case. My suggestion is that you talk about it for somewhere between 2 to 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I could see going up to as much as 3 minutes if there's a thriving debate on your case. But you start out the debate and you say, the negative case is the most important case in this debate. It is the vital question that you, the judge, should settle. And I'm going to definitively prove that my criterion is important, that my contentions link to my criterion and are important. And then you do that. Go ahead, do that. Extend your points first. Oh, we actually forgot to mention a very particular thing, Lawrence, that we'll have to add at the end of the 2AR stuff. That's actually incredibly important for organization. But anyway, so the point is, go through and win your case in about 2 minutes, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Convince the judge it's vital. Do not just win your case. Explain, my case is extremely important for this debate. It's the most important consideration. It's more important than the affirmative case, etc. So then, after you do that, I want you, in lay rounds, okay, to go to your opponent's case and pick your 3 best arguments that you made in the 1N. That includes ones that are not as responded to, but it also could just include things that you're just extremely right about. And I want you to talk about each of these issues for somewhere between 45 seconds to a minute each, which does not sound like a lot of time, but is in fact an incredibly large amount of time relative to the probably original length of these arguments. That's because judges don't really have a great memory. And you need to tell judges what you're supposed to do with arguments. So win a point, but then do not just win the point. Say, this point is extremely important. I want you to think about it. It's one of the 3 important voting issues in this round. It's why their case is false, etc. One other rule that I would really make important to you guys, always, and gals, of course, always, and everything in between. And what you need to do is you need to explain why your issue is important. You need to number it, and one of them needs to be about the criterion. Always. Always one of them needs to be some objection to your criterion. Multiples of them could be about the criterion. I would have at least one about the contention, though. 45 seconds to a minute. I would not bend on that. And then when you have about 45 seconds left, I would give voting issues. And those voting issues better be hella good. And those voting issues need to be precise, they need to be clean, and they need to sound great. Because your opponent will have the last word. Two things I want to add about that before I let Lawrence talk. Number one, make sure at some point in your speech to say that the AF doesn't get new 2AR arguments. It is vital that you that you do not forget to do that, because your opponent otherwise will make new 2AR arguments and the judge won't know, and then you might lose. And then the last thing, it is very easy for the judge again to forget about your stuff. And therefore, this speech needs to sound extremely good. You should spend prep time organizing it. And the last thing, these issues that you are isolating, these three things that you're winning, they are not affected by offense, defense. In lay rounds, that's not really important to judges. The important thing is just that whatever argument you've made, just that you are right about that argument. If you are extremely right about it, your opponent should lose. All right, enough of a rant. Lawrence, what are your thoughts?
So I think I agree, despite the fact that I probably didn't adhere very strictly to those guidelines in high school. I'll start by saying that at NSDA Nationals, my senior year, most of my second negative speeches started on the affirmative case and then went to the negative case. But that is because every speech except for finals, every 2N speech except for finals that year, I was going for case turns in the 2N every single debate. Usually just like the AF increases terrorism, because that was the topic was national security versus privacy. And I always made that like 4 minutes of the 2N, trying to explain, desperately pleading to judges. These aren't reasons for why the AF just doesn't do anything good. It's that they're bad. And still, occasionally, I would lose a ballot to a judge that is like, case turns are not offense. And I'd be like, well, okay, I tried. So if I had to redo it and go back and fix those speeches, I would probably put the negative case first, just like Martin has suggested. And the reason I think I would change my strategy is, A, because I actually got told by two coaches during the course of the tournament that I should do that. And I didn't listen to them. And two, because I always would frame the negative case as being a higher layer than the affirmative. And the organization of my second negative speech would almost always start with some sort of overview, like, the negative case, they've undercovered it. It is a higher layer and is side constraint on the affirmative case. But also in the affirmative case, they are losing that they are actually increasing security. Let us go there now. But based on the overview, it really makes much more logical sense to start with the negative case and then move to the affirmative case. And so upon recognizing it later, many years in the future, I would have changed that. So
well, I mean, look, you did pretty well at that tournament, right?
Yeah, but like, so do some other people who, don't have good organization or even like good evidence practices. I'm not sure if success is a reason for emulation in.
But the thing is, but I mean, just like answer me honestly. I mean, do you think that it is viable to start on the affirmative case and just pressure them with turns for 4 minutes before moving to the neg? Because like, if that is viable, like, I mean, I want to know about it.
That was actually I believe the only tournament I did that at. All throughout the rest of the season, I didn't do that, but that was because the bulk of my negative prep on that topic was in fact focused on turning the affirmative case. And I just kind of like wanted something new to surprise people with. Whereas every other tournament leading up to that was always just like the cont NC and then case turns at the end. So it's viable. In retrospect, I would not recommend doing it again.
Okay. Well then,
but I just want to like put out.
But that is very interesting.
Yeah, like I just like want to put it out there. Like maybe if you're considering doing it, I'm telling you as someone who did it relatively successfully, I would have changed that.
Okay. All right. So the 2AR, we actually did an entire episode on this. But it's basically the same as the 2N, except you have the last word. Make it count. The end of your speech better sound great. 30 to 45 seconds minimum for voting issues. Winning stuff on the line by line does not help you nearly as much as just out persuading the judges. I highly recommend you just pick a couple points and talk about them for a really long time. 1 point about the criterion, maybe 2. And 1 point about your contention, maybe 2. Maybe 1 point about their case, maybe 2. But, no more than 3 arguments, I would say, should be in any 2AR. Pick your absolute best. Talk about them for an extremely long time.
Yep. Agreed.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I do have one more thing, though, that I think it's actually vital for us to talk about. I've used the word vital a lot. Lawrence, how are your vitals?
I'm sure my heart rate is in the low 40s right now, just given my current state of exhaustion, but we'll see.
Intense. Okay, so let's talk about extensions. So, Lawrence, here's my question. So, I'm going to give you 3 options, and I want you to pick the one. So if for extensions, one option for extensions is to extend every argument in your case and then address all of your opponent's responses to your case. The second option is to address all of your opponent's responses to your case, then extend all of the arguments in your case, and then move on. And the third option is to extend arguments, and then after you extend an argument, address their objection to it. And the fourth option, I guess, is if your opponent, that you respond to objections and then extend the original point after you respond to each objection on each individual argument. So that's option A, B, C, D. Which option is the best?
You got to get better at organization, Martin, because you said that there are options 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you called them A, B, C, D, and that mixturing of numbering and lettering might confuse
How about alpha, beta, kappa, and gamma options? Alpha, beta, kappa, or gamma?
Why kappa? Isn't like the phonetic alphabet like alpha, beta, Charlie, delta?
I just use the ones that correspond with random frets that I know.
What a lovely metric. I'm a big fan of, and I don't at this point in time I now forget what option it is. The one where you like extend your stuff first and then answer their stuff second. And the reason I'm a fan of this, although not married to it, because I don't suggest this for everyone, is because
you mean C, right? The third one, right?
Yeah, C. I think that was the one, right?
Okay. Not A, where you'd extend all your stuff and then answer all of their stuff, right?
No.
Okay,
extend individual argument, respond to their stuff. So the reason I recommend this is because I think if you start with the responding to your opponent's stuff first, you end up missing out on extending the best portion of your warrants for your argument. I mean, in fact, I frequently see this in traditional debates where people will say, go to my first contention. They say X is wrong for Y reason, but Y reason is actually false. And in the midst of answering Y reason, they have failed to extend any reasons for why X is correct. And so at the end of the 1AR, I'm usually just like, yes, you have correctly beaten back the negatives arguments against your case while failing to extend anything that compels me to affirm the resolution. And so that is the number one reason, I think, why it's usually important to start with extending stuff first, because it prevents you from just forgetting to extend stuff. And for a lot of debaters, I think this is actually important because even at the upper echelons of debate, like even in outrounds of the NSDA national tournament or even the NCFL national tournament, this still ends up being a thing where people just not extend an actual valid reason to affirm from their affirmative case. But the second...
I squirreled, by the way, in a debate, and I was a prelim debate at the CFL national tournament in a round where the neg dropped the AF case in the 1N. I have talked about this. Yeah. The neg dropped the AF case completely, just did not answer it. Read their case, sat down. The AF case put 4 minutes of defense on the NC in the 1AR. And then the neg responded to the AF for the first time with 4 minutes of new arguments, but then extended their case, and they was therefore the only one that had offense, and then just won immediately. And of course, I squirreled because the other two judges were just random lay people, and the other guy was way more persuasive than her. But
to be fair, I would not. It does not appear unreasonable to vote for to vote for the affirmative in this debate. But technically speaking, yes, the affirmative would have failed to extend any valid reason to vote affirmative in the.
They didn't debate. It's not that they didn't extend it; they just never mentioned after the 1AC why we should do the resolution.
Yeah, no valid reason to vote F. So that'd be sad. And so, yeah, like even at like national tournaments. People still do this. And so I think it's important to hedge back against this. The second reason I think this is important is because, again, when you're constructing your affirmative case, one of the things I always recommend is after you've finished writing contention, think about what the top 3 to 5 negative responses are going to be to this contention and figure out how your contention beats that response. And so, like, if you don't have like a preliminary thought about what they're going to say and how they're going to respond, well, you should just do more prep. But once you do that, once you finish that, that means built into your extension can be some strong reasons to knock out their responses to your contention. So, say, for example, a frequently mentioned response against any given affirmative contention is going to be some lines of no warrant. This evidence isn't that good at saying what you want it to say.
Yeah.
And so now when you extend your contention, now you get to say, this answers their no warrant claim. My evidence is awesome. And now you don't have to repeat yourself. Whereas if you started with their response, you'd have to say, they say no warrant, and then insert your entire affirmative extension again, and then extend it a separate time later or something like that. And it gets confusing and muddling that way. Whereas I think starting with your extension first and then answering their no warrant by saying, this was in the extension, I wrote it very well. It says a lot of things, as it turns out. I think that's a strong reason for option C. But again, I'm not married to it. And in fact, I've suggested for various people different ways to approach extensions.
I think option C is definitely clearly right. And in particular for that second reason. If your argument is going to be that your opponent's argument does not respond and you're trying to answer no warrants, the easiest way of answering that is this is true for the vast majority of situations. The easiest way to answer your opponent's objections is for the judge to understand your argument, right? If the judge just gets your point, then it shouldn't matter, and you should just win. All right, so that's what I got for organization. And when we come back, we'll do the conclusion part of our episodes and the only important part of our episode, the mini debate. Thank you, everyone, to listening to this extremely lengthy episode. We do think that organization is a really important topic, but at the end of the day, there really isn't that much you can say about it. Thank you again to our sponsor, Victory Briefs, for sponsoring this episode of the Argument Clinic podcast. They are a great debate camp, and I highly recommend that you all do go to it, as well as their brief service edited by Lawrence. So if you see any typographical errors, please blame him. Okay, so now it's time for our mini debate. Let's do gum brands because I'm lazy. Jeez, Lawrence, what is your favorite gum brand?
Whichever one is cheapest that I can get my whole hands on.
What, Trident?
Trident's pretty cheap. I started gravitating
for quantity. But I think it's actually gotten worse. It used to be better, or maybe I'm just getting more taste.
So it depends. So I think nowadays the only time I chew gum is when I'm flying, just to help deal with ear pressure. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of the time I just pick up Denton Ice or the Trident with xylitol in it. So yeah, I don't chew gum very often, and half the time when I'm flying anyways, I just have a water bottle with me, which alleviates the need to buy gum, which I always only do at airports nowadays, which is super expensive because it's $2 for gum, and I'm like, why am I doing this? So not particularly attached to any gum brand, sorry.
I do like the flavors of five gum the most, I think. But the Trident quantity is difficult to argue. One thing I will say is that Trident is these days a lot worse than it was.
Agreed.
So can we just both agree on old Trident gum?
Yeah. To be fair, I'm really partial toward just old style double bubble gum. Not for any reason because it was good, but I probably just mostly nostalgia for the days when my parents.
I had a little bit of nostalgia, but then I tried it as an adult and I was like, this sucks.
Well, yeah, it probably does. I haven't had it in a while, but I think it's just because as a young Asian youth, my parents prohibited me from consuming very much candy. So whenever I could get my hands on some, it was usually at school when the teachers would hand out the cheapest candy they could give you, which is because they're teachers and especially in Oklahoma, they're underpaid. And so they give you double bubble. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I love candy.
Yeah. Well, okay. Trident's definitely better than double bubble. Not even close. But you're right that, there is a kids will definitely have anything. Okay, so that wasn't really much of a mini debate, but I'm just going to declare myself the winner because Lawrence audible to double bubble at the end. So there you go. Boom.
Sad.
I defeated you. 1-0. All right, everyone. We will see you the next time we have an episode. Stay frosty.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.